illustration is all about communication. Or even more specifically, it's about storytelling. The Oxford Language Dictionary defines story as an account of imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment. So as an illustrator, my job is to tell a story without the help of words. And more often than not, that's a lot harder than it sounds. If someone gives you a pen and paper and gives you the word, let's say tree, as your only guidance for creating an illustration that tells a story, you might feel a little overwhelmed. I mean, the possibilities are endless for what you could put down on the page. It's a blue sky assignment that gives you full creative freedom, but not a lot of clear direction. There's a saying in the animation and illustration industries that story is key. Sure, you want to make something beautiful, but more importantly, you want to make something that shares something. Storytelling in art is like taking a walk in the dark with nothing but a lantern in your hand. You can only see the step you're taking right now. But even though the path is dark, each step leads you to another idea, and then another that builds off of the last one. Sometimes you take a step off the path and discover a new path. And sometimes you step off of the path into a muddy ditch and you need to turn around. But it's all about the journey, which is very exciting, but also very terrifying. And this is exactly the kind of assignment I've given myself this year, to create 20 illustrations, each centered around a one-word prompt. So this illustration's prompt was food. Now sometimes I read the prompt, grab my pencil and paper, and crickets. There's nothing going on in my noggin. Thankfully that wasn't the case for this one, however. Almost immediately, a picture started forming in my head of a young girl baking or cooking with a little dragon sitting on her shoulder. But even so, that's still only one small piece of information. I could pose those characters in any way from any perspective. I could tell endless stories from that. Are they chefs at a gourmet restaurant? Are they pals in a home kitchen? Are they cooking a pot of soup or baking a pan of brownies? So I got to work sketching, trying out those different angles and ideas, sketching a quick thumbnail, taking what I liked from it, and moving on to the next. I narrowed my idea down to the two characters working in a bread bakery, but this was still a pretty broad topic. I'm not gonna lie, this prompt had me sketching for a while. For the longest time, I just could not seem to illustrate the story that I wanted to tell. Each sketch had a little something I liked in it, but I just couldn't quite hit the nail on the head. Until this thumbnail. And the story just kind of unfolded. The scent of sweet rolls wafts through the air as you knead the dough between your knuckles. The baker sits upon your shoulder watching your every move. Now, as the baker's apprentice, you still have a lot to learn, but the bakery is your favorite place on earth and you can't imagine anywhere you'd rather be. Once I decided on the story and a basic thumbnail sketch, it was time to fill the scene. I researched medieval kitchens and drew inspiration from the textures, the patterns, the colors, creating an arched window and a dark stone floor. I also researched bread baking and the many different kinds of delicious breads out there. Unfortunately, I'm a gluten-free gal and was unable to fully fulfill my research duties and taste test.
But it's fine.
So a really big inspiration for this piece was Kitty Tate. She's a co-owner of the Orange Bakery in England and author of the book Bread Song. She has such a deep passion for bread baking and sharing what she makes with other people. She's truly a craftsman, and I always drool over her bread photos on Instagram.
Wow!
One of the things she said is that bread is a universal language, a universal love. And I really wanted to try to articulate that in a painting. I did lots of little bread sketches to try to get a feel for the unique shapes, textures, and colors for different types of bread. Now, I know I've said this 1,000 times, but I really love exploring different topics in my illustrations and learning more about them in the context of art. Guys, my nerdiness is
Amplified by 1,000 when I'm doing research for an illustration.
So, armed with a story and a finalized sketch, I created a digital value and color key and got to work painting. I wanted our characters to be the main focal point, so I really needed to set up a lighting and color scheme that would really help to emphasize them. A big tool in creating a lighting scheme is figuring out your exposure. You need to think like a camera. What's your focus? Are your details going to be in the shadows or in the highlights? So I decided to have bright morning sun streaming through the big arched window, but I really wanted our character to have more detailing, so I needed to expose for the shadows. So all the little details in the light, they would have to go. Not cutting them out entirely, but fitting them into a much more narrow range of values with softer edges. And to do this with gouache, well, I needed to work quick.
I mean like Flash from DC kind of quick.
Getting as much blocked in as I could while my paper was still wet. So I talked in my color theory video about how all color is relative to the colors around it. Now the same is true for lighting. Something is only light or dark compared to the things around it. Because this piece was so dependent on nailing the lighting and also dependent on the color comparisons, I decided that getting a base layer down for the whole illustration ASAP would be my best option. That way I could start to kind of get a feel for comparing my darks to my lights, warms to cools, and so on. Once that was done, I could go in and start rendering things out more. Now my initial urge is always to render everything, but that doesn't make for a very harmonious painting. To create a focal point, you need those areas that don't draw as much attention to themselves. The ceiling is not the focal point. It needs a smaller range of value and color. Same for the walls and the shelves on the left. Now because the counter and the shelves on the left aren't in the direct light, there's going to be a little bit more detail to them since we're exposing for the shadows. But not too much because I don't want to pull the attention away from our characters. Having those color and value keys pulled up on my computer while I'm painting is super helpful for really keeping me focused on the overall statement. My keys aren't super rendered, they're just focused on the basic color and value structures. Having that bit of a roadmap really keeps me grounded while also allowing me to be more intuitive with my brushstrokes as I'm actually painting.
If that makes any sense.
Anywho, let's take a little break from the painting chat to talk about some other fun things going on in my cozy little corner of the art world. Y'all have really seemed to enjoy my wood-carved style animal paintings, and I've gotten a crap ton of requests to make some products with them. Now, I'm gonna be 100% honest with you, friend. I get nervous making new products.
This has burned me before.
I'll get requests to make something, and then nobody buys it, which is kind of rough on a small business in its early stages. I know for sure that a lot of that is on me because I'm not always good about marketing the things I make. I think a lot of artists really do tend to struggle with marketing in their careers. We like making things, but we have a really hard time asking people to pay for them. And it's dumb because I know we shouldn't. Like gas stations don't just hand out free gas. They're trying to run a business. Gotta pay those bills. But creatives tend to get a little squirmy about that. That was a whole rabbit trail. Anyways, back to the news. So I took a poll on Instagram to gauge the favorite designs and finally took the leap and made a sticker of one of the foxes and a keychain of the seahorse. Y'all, the colors!
They look so cute!
I'm very happy with how they turned out, and I also got a really good deal through Sticker Mule to get them printed, so it was a double win. And the orders, guys! The orders have come flooding in to adopt these little dudes, especially the sticker, which is very exciting. There are a ton of unknowns when trying to run an art business. You know, the many, and I mean many failures that I've had in my business always teach me something. Every failure helps me grow my business skills. But those failures can also be kind of disheartening. I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of times where I really feel like the things that I do and the art I create doesn't really make a difference and doesn't help anybody. So big wins like these are super encouraging when they do happen because they remind me that my artwork does make an impact in some people's lives. Now I know I'm not curing a disease or solving world hunger or anything, but if the only impact I make on a person is giving them some small reason to smile, then, you know, that's enough for me. Beyond that, I've been working in my sketchbooks a ton lately. Lots of dip pen playtime, lots of dip pen tigers. I have been in a dip pen phase, and I may never come out. I don't know, we'll see. I've also started working on a small passion project.
A side quest, if you will.
Some of y'all know my family and I said goodbye to our very beloved, very fluffy family member in December. She was a scruffy little rescue mutt with a very, very big personality. It's really been on my heart these past few months to try to find some way of honoring her memory and to help other rescues out there like her. So right now I'm working on designing a sticker sheet inspired by Ella, and my goal is to give a big portion of the proceeds from it to rescues or shelters that are working to give dogs a second chance. I was thinking maybe the Asher House or Hope for Paws, or maybe some more local rescues. I haven't quite worked out the logistics yet, but I'd really love for y'all to be a part of this, so if you have any suggestions for different rescues, I'd love to hear them. Maybe we could even spread the donations across a few different places. So, what else is going on? I've been working on the sketch for my next full illustration featuring an animal with a very unique skull structure. I've been doing a ton of studies in preparation for this one because I realized I had absolutely no idea how to paint this particular animal. And speaking of animals, I just finished the animals for the Arctic tundra theme of our wood-carved animal series. Guys, I think this might be my favorite set yet. I believe that'll be in the next video? Question mark? I don't know. We'll see. I shared one of the paintings over on Patreon because, you know what, I was really stoked about how it turned out and I literally could not wait to share it. I'll give you a little hint.
He has polka dots.
Y'all know I'm all about the Dottie's body bits, okay? Anywho, let's get back to the painting. So I knew for sure that I wanted a lot of really warm, earthy, kind of golden tones to play off of the bread theme. But I didn't want to go full on beige for the whole thing. I'm a sucker for greens, and I wanted the bread shelf on the right to be kind of a secondary focal point, so I thought painting the shelf green would create a bit more contrast with the loaves of bread. When I started actually painting the shelf, it came out very, very green.
And I was very confused.
I had mixed my green with a bit of red to kind of gray it down, as well as a rich yellow to warm it up, but it looked starkly green. Finally, I used that fancy little color picker on my digital color key, and what do you know? The green in the color comp was actually a deep golden yellow. It doesn't look like a huge shift on the wheel, but in comparison to the rest of the colors, it was pretty drastic. I ended up using a few light washes over the top to kind of push it more towards that golden side, and also to soften the edges of the loaves of bread that I had over-rendered. I went a little ham with the rendering on those, and they were a bit too,
hey, look at me,
in comparison to the character. I liked the way they looked, but they were too distracting. Now, because the characters are the main focal point, I wanted to really make them pop with color. Green and red are complementary colors, so I decided to make the girl's uniform a deep red. The red still fits into the warm, earthy color scheme, but juxtaposes really well with the greens throughout the piece.
Oh, I'm sorry, the apparent yellows throughout the piece.
Anywho, the red of her uniform would also pair really well with the dragon's wing. I knew from the very beginning that this piece was the perfect opportunity to play around with subsurface scattering on the wing in front of the window. That strong light source would seep through the wing and turn it into a very dazzling orange. So one thing I'm still learning about gouache is the varying opacities between colors as well as the saturation. My yellows have a much lower opacity rating than, let's say, my greens. But I knew this going into the piece. So one of the key elements of subsurface scattering is vibrancy. To get the translucent effect of wings as well as the peak saturation of the subsurface scattering, I needed to use the white of the paper to play off the opacity of my paints. I couldn't actually add white paint to my mixture because it would dampen the saturation. So I basically had one shot at mixing the right color for this. Overmixing your gouache is a one-way ticket to killing the saturation. So my initial base layer gave me a kind of gentle guide to the lights and darks of the wing, as well as where the wing would be most saturated. And the final layer was where the magic happened. I could not have been happier with how the wing turned out. However, the girl's skin was an absolute nightmare. I painted and repainted so many times. Again, there was a lot of opportunity for warmth and saturation in the skin, but
my gosh,
I could not seem to get the right shadow shapes in the face. It was a deal, but I think we got there in the end. So as usual, I brought in my colored pencils for touch-ups throughout the piece. There was one main area that needed some TLC, and that was the tray of Pano on the table.
Why?
You may ask.
They're just simple swirls.
Aha! I thought so too, but wow, was I wrong.
I swear, those are the swirls of Satan.
Trying to figure out where my shadows and highlights were supposed to go and which parts were supposed to be the most saturated on an ever-twisting chunk of bread was an absolute nightmare. I only ended up being happy with like 2 of them, but you know, nothing's completely perfect. There's always room to improve, and sometimes you just gotta call a piece finished. I'm gonna be honest, this one sat untouched in my studio for quite a while. I kept thinking it needed just one more thing, but I could not for the life of me figure out what that one thing was. And then it hit me. I wanted some little element of nature. So I added these little leafy vines to the ceiling, sort of trailing down the wall. It was a change that took like 5 minutes, but it was the change that really satisfied me with the piece. At that point, the illustration was done, and I was ready to go on to the next. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed watching me paint this one and chatting with me. Huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for bearing with me while I worked on the tray of devil's bread. We all got a good giggle over how much I was struggling. Anywho, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye guys!